Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Fabled Upkeep. I'm your host, Freddie, joined by my co-host, Neal.
Hey, how are you?
And our co-host, Jared.
Hello, friends.
And tonight we have a new, fun, exciting deck tech for y'all from one of the new commanders from Kaldheim. It's going to be Vorinclex, Monstrous Raider. And Jared, why don't you go ahead and tell everybody a little bit about this wonderful commander?
Yeah, sure. So Vorinclex's version 2.0, if you will. He is 4 mana and 2 green. So 6 mana for a 6/6 with trample and haste. And he says if you would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many of each of those counters on that permanent or player instead. So, little bit of a doubling season effect. Also, though, a little bit of hate. If an opponent would put one or more counters on a permanent or player, they put half that many of each of those kinds of counters on that permanent or player instead, rounded down. That being key. So one of the big things with that third or fourth ability is if they +1 a planeswalker, they actually put 0 counters on it. So that's an interesting little rules tidbit that I looked up before we did this deck tech. So I thought that was kind of cool. And also, I feel like this commander is really strong. It didn't need that last ability, but I feel like they included it kind of as homage to the first Vorinclex, which is the one that doubled your mana but halved all of your opponent's mana. So I feel like they did that just for that reason.
Yeah, I agree.
And I feel like they also did the whole Praetor hosing everybody at the table, right?
So
they all had that negative half.
So in y'all's opinion, do you find this version of Vorinclex better or worse than the original?
I would say that this version is like the Terminator of commanders in a command zone, to be honest. It's just like brutal to face and a blast to play with. So it's one of those commanders, though, that I...
Do you feel like if whenever this comes out on the field, do you feel that same type of, oh man, that sucks? You know, like when the original Vorinclex hit the field, usually the consensus around the table is like, oh man, that just feels bad. Do you feel like that's the same with this one?
I personally don't. I think this one's definitely
I thought the
a lot
same
more
thing too. Fair, I guess.
Yeah, to whatever degree you want to call fair. It's definitely very, very strong, but it's not as oppressive as the old one. Absolutely. I mean, there's ways to play around it. It's still a creature. If it's not protected, it definitely dies. But if left unchecked, this guy will put in some work. To give an example from some of the playtesting I did, I ended up with 187, 187 Yorvo with trample.
Oh, wow. That's some doubling of counters.
So, yeah.
From my perspective,
all the stars aligned that game, but you know.
Yeah. And from my perspective, I would definitely say that this Vorinclex is more table friendly, let's say, than the previous one. I think they're both very strong, honestly. Right. And this one is particularly strong just because it also has haste and it costs 2 mana less than the original Vorinclex. So, you know, the original Vorinclex, yeah, sure, it doubled your mana, but it cost you 8 mana to do that, and it was on a creature, which, you know, like, unlike Zendikar Resurgent, it's much easier to get rid of. And it doesn't draw you cards, right? I mean, it reduces your opponent's mana, but that's not really the reason you're playing it, I guess. It might be a little bit, you know, if you're putting it in a more Staxy build. But anyways, the new Vorinclex, which is kind of the focus of this deck tech, you know, it does not draw that kind of table hate because counters are really a much more specific strategy, right? So
Yes, absolutely. And that's piggyback off of that real fast, and let's get into the guts of this deck. What are we trying to accomplish, right? And I think that there's a few ways you can go about building this, which I think each one of us had a completely different take on what this commander is all about. Kind of overlapping in some ways, but like for my deck, for example, I really went all in and heavy on the +1/+1 counter. How can I exploit that? How can I build on that? And also planeswalkers. Because, you know, I just like being able to alt a Garruk Caller of Beasts as soon as it hits the table and get emblems because, you know, why not? Emblems are fun. You can't interact with them. And I get free creatures. Seems good. I also was Definitely enjoying playing with cards that you don't normally see at a commander table as much, like Hardened Scales. I really love that card in here. Very undervalued, I think, and put in a lot of work when I was playing around with it. Doubling Season, of course, if you have $50 laying around to be able to throw a Doubling Season in. Definitely a great one. Same with the Great Henge. Cards like that. But Neal, why don't you tell me a little bit about what you did with yours? Because yours, I think, is the most unique out of ours.
I guess. But I definitely wanted to. So I guess one of the negative things about Vorinclex is it is somewhat linear. And, there's either you can do, +1/+1 counters, maybe a Planeswalker theme, or you could probably go down the path of infect or poison, whatever you want to call it nowadays, since they change it all the time. But I chose to kind of go off of the +1/+1 counters, but really focus on some really interesting creatures that green is known for, which is Hydras. So I kind of built my Vorinclex around Hydras, which also, interestingly enough, deal with +1/+1 counters. And anybody who's played against a big stompy green deck, I mean, these things can get quite massive. And Vorinclex, that doubling it's pretty amazing for sure. What about you, Jared? Which way did you take yours?
Yeah, so I have a minor Hydra sub theme in mind because they're really awesome with Vorinclex. You're able to get that much value out of them whenever you cast them, whenever they come into play or attack, whatever it may be. Speaking of Doubling Season and the Great Henge, which Freddie mentioned earlier, I have those in my maybe board just because they're so expensive that definitely would have, went over my particular deck's budget. So, but they're really, really good cards that should be in the deck.
Yeah, I definitely didn't. We normally go with a $300 budget for this program, but I definitely broke that today and said, "The heck with it," and my deck came out to about 1,500.
1,500, geez, what are you?
But that's because, well, that's all cards that I already own, right? So, like, I got to play with cards that I already have.
I guess that makes me
I'm
feel
not saying
like
that you should go out and just blow $1,500 on a deck, but if you have the cards, I mean, why not, right? Enjoy them. And this deck really made me want to pull out some cards that honestly have been sitting in my binders for a while, and I never really use them.
Well, that's cool, man. I'm glad you're able to do it. For those that are more budget conscious, though, my version of the deck comes in at a neat 257.34. Okay.
Oh wow!
So if you're looking for a more budget version, you could look towards mine.
So we have the Toyotas, and then we have the Lexus, right? I mean. And then if you really want to talk about like if you want to bling it out and spend a lot of money, by all means do it. It's possible. You can do some crazy fun things with some amazing cards like Gaia's Cradle. That's about 2/3 of the budget of my deck. It's just that one card that I happen to have that just sits there.
Oh, I see.
I could definitely pull that out and my deck would be right around $400 or $500. But
yeah, cradles are probably out of most people's price range now. I mean, full disclosure, I have cradles as well, multiple. I'm one of those guys, but I tend not
we've been
to play
playing Magic for a long
anymore.
time, right?
I know, right? I guess that's the nature of the world. The cards go up in price. I mean, and you just don't expect them to go up just such a crazy amount. But again, that's for near mint, I mean, I say that, right? But even like heavily played cradles are a crazy amount of money, but still. You could get them cheaper if you look around, whatever. But again, even a heavily played cradle is like twice the price of what my budget is for this deck. So anyways, but yeah, great. I'm glad you were able to put cradle in yours. That's a very powerful card.
It's a fun one.
Not to go off on a tangent like Freddie would normally do, but, building this mono green deck, I don't know if you guys felt the same way, but man, for as long as I've played Magic, green is just it's crazy how powerful and how many different things green is able to do nowadays, right? I don't know if you got that same sense when you built your deck, but it was kind of a little bit of awe with how many different things that green is able to do. Mine, it ramps and it has pretty decent card draw. It's got really big creatures and, pretty decent removal here and there. It's just, I was quite impressed at how, how it all comes together. I don't know if y'all had the same view on your end.
I think that green is definitely one of the pet, if not the pet color in the past, I want to say maybe decade. I don't know if we want to say decade or not. But yeah, I totally agree. You have everything in green that you would need to build a deck and not feel like you're lacking in a department. But yeah, let's get back on track though. We're talking a little bit in circles here about everything except what the deck is wanting to do. So let's get back on the focus of what the game plan is, and let's highlight some of those cards that are the big key pieces to making Mr. Vorinclex powerful as he is. Jared, what cards would you like to highlight?
Yeah, sure. So the cards that I included in my main game plan, if you will, the first card I will talk about is a Hydra. It is called Voracious Hydra. It's X green green for a 0/1 with trample. Enters the battlefield with X +1/+1 counters. And when it enters the battlefield, you can choose one. You can either double the number of counters on it, which with a Vorinclex in play quadruples. Okay, so you get 4 times the amount of counters on it. Or you can have it fight a creature you don't control. So I love this card because it's both a gigantic body if you want it, or it's a removal spell. So it's a kind of a modal card in this deck. So I thought that was pretty cool. Another
Wow.
Hydra that I included was Mana Gorger Hydra. So that's the 2 and a green trample. Whenever a player casts a spell, put a +1/+1 counter on Mana Gorger Hydra. With Vorinclex in play, you put 2 counters on it. So yeah, that thing gets out of hand crazy fast. I think one of the best creatures for this deck though is Forgotten Ancient. So this is an elemental 0/3, and whenever a player casts a spell, you can put a +1/+1 counter on it. So it's for every spell cast, just like the Mana Gorger Hydra. But you can then move any number of counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures you control during your upkeep. So you're basically quadrupling your counters here because you get double the counters for every spell cast. Then when you move them, you double them again. It's exactly what you want to do with this deck.
Oh, absolutely. And then let's piggyback off of that and talk about an artifact that is, I think, key to keeping the engine going, so to speak, and that's the Ozolith. The Ozolith right there, if your Forgotten Ancient were to get removed, or any of your creatures with a +1/+1 counters on them for that matter were to be removed, well, the Ozolith is going to catch all those 1/1 counters on it, and then you'll be able to redistribute them during your combat. So it is quite a powerful card, especially in a theme with 1/1 counters. Obviously, you want to keep this card in the main board at all times. Another card that I really wanted to highlight too is Vigor. Vigor, my friend, is my baby. I love Vigor in this deck. I love Vigor in general, but Vigor in this deck is... Oh, that's how I got my 187 Orvo. Somebody didn't read the card and attacked into me, and well, what do you know? Things got a little nutty. But your Vigor is 6 CMC, 6/6, 3 green, 3 colorless, trample, and it says, if damage would be dealt to another creature you control, prevent that damage and put a 1/1 counter on that creature for each 1 damage prevented this way. And then we can double them with Vorinclex. And if we have something like, oh, I don't know, a doubling season or a hardened scales, well, we either double it or +1 extra counter on top of the double. You can see how things start to snowball out of control.
Yeah, totally. And actually, just looking through Neal's deck and, Freddie's deck and my deck, one thing I'm noticing too is that, Neal mentioned earlier, mono green is so strong nowadays. It feels like even if they permanently remove our commander, like, if they Darksteel Mutation our commander and it's out of the game permanently, our deck could still run fine. It could easily win the game without our commander. That's how strong our decks are, I feel. I mean, this is definitely a strong one for sure.
Yeah,
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
absolutely.
I would almost
And
say that the counter, I think counters is probably a pretty popular strategy that Wizards kind of likes to mess with. And I mean, you can tell because you have a lot of backups, right? So in my version, I'm going to want to have those backups just in case, like you mentioned, they're probably going to be gunning for Vorinclex, right? So you got, like Freddie mentioned, you got Doubling Season. Well, now you got Branching Evolution, right? Which is the new card. It only costs 3, and it's actually half the price of Doubling Season. And it basically allows you to, if one or more +1/+1 counters would be put on a creature, you put twice that many, right? And that's 2 and a green for an enchantment. And then I also did Primeval Bounty. That one's 5 and a green. And this one kind of does multiple things. I like it because the things that you're doing in green, you're getting some different benefits. So this enchantment for 6 basically says whenever you cast a creature spell, which we're going to cast a lot of them, you're going to get a 3/3 green beast creature token. And then whenever you cast a non-creature spell, you're going to put 3 +1/+1 counters on target creature you control, which if you got Vorinclex or Doubling Season or Branching Evolution, that can really add up, or even Hardened Scales. And then last, every time you play a land, which green is notorious for ramping and putting a lot of lands in play, whenever you put it under your control, you gain 3 life. And this has actually saved me quite a few times by just, if you catch those ramp cards later in the game, if you have Primeval Bounty out, you're gaining a little bit of life if you're getting low. Those were kind of pretty.
So I just want to point something out about Primeval Bounty. This is me getting on a tangent. Sorry, guys, but has anybody noticed that the wording on Primeval Bounty is very, very similar to an Elder Gargaroth? Maybe just take the +1/+1 counters out of it and draw a card in there, and hey, it's Elder Gargaroth not on a stick.
Yeah.
Enchantment. Pretty sweet card though. I have to say, Primeval Bounty is an amazing ad.
And then I'm sure each of you probably saw Unbound Flourishing, which is another enchantment, 2 and a green. And basically, whenever you cast a permanent spell with X, right? And Hydras usually are X in their cost, right? You get to double that value of X, right? And then depending upon how you build the deck, if you do have instant or sorceries that have a mana cost that contain X, you get to kind of copy that spell or ability, and you can obviously choose new targets for that copy. So, depending upon how much the second part of that enchantment may not provide any benefit to you, but I put it in my version just because a lot of my Hydras do have X cost. So just having that, again, that kind of backup to Vorinclex, this was just a very cheap, it's only $7, and it's 3 mana just to have a little bit of backup, so it's kind of nice.
Yeah, this card actually, I want to say, tanked in value in the past few months. It was up at $30, I think 6 months ago.
Yeah.
It's kind of amazing how the prices fluctuate so much.
Yeah, I think the reason it's gone down is people realized it's a little more narrow than originally they thought it was, because at first people are like, oh, it doubles, but then you look at it, it's like, well, it's just things that have X in it, which is like super specific, which is why I didn't include it in mine. But also at the same time, I'm thinking like, wow, imagine having Unbound Flourishing in play with Genesis Wave. Oh, game's over.
Right.
Genesis Wave for 20 instead of 10. I mean, oof, yeah. That's pretty
Don't
nice.
be knocking my X spells. I like me some Zixara or Zahara, however you guys want to pronounce it. But X spells are a thing, and I love them. Let's talk a little bit more about, should we get into some removal maybe?
Sure.
In the deck? Go ahead and touch base on some removal for the deck. So why don't we go ahead and start talking real quick about Vigor. Force of Vigor, to be exact, because Vigor's in the deck. Why not have Force of Vigor to go with it, which I think is one of the best removal spells in green that you can get.
I'll second that.
I mean, it's 4 CMC, right? But we never want to cast it for the 4 CMC. We want to be able to cast it for its alternate cost, like all the other forces. And this one says, if it's not your turn, you may exile a green card from your hand rather than paying its mana cost. And what it does, it destroys up to 2 target artifacts and or enchantments. So, what better way than to get a free spell out to destroy 2 enchantments or 2 artifacts or artifact and enchantment combo? I mean, sign me up, man. Where can I get more copies of this?
Yeah, I was kind of curious, that I think, as though we talked about green being able to do kind of everything, right? The Swiss Army knife of colors. I do find that my toughest area to kind of fill is removal, right? Because I think a lot of us get used to those white exile effects, the black destroy, green. That's not really, especially when it comes to just creatures, right? They're good at, enchantments and artifacts, right? But when it comes to permanents or targeted removal, it's a little tougher, right? Usually you have to lean into fight mechanics or something like that. So I'm interested to kind of see what other cards you had, Freddie, and also Jared, that kind of combat that, because I went a couple of different ones, but I'm really curious to see what you guys came up with, because this was tough for me.
Yeah, I agree. Removal was definitely the toughest part of this deck for those reasons that you mentioned, where you have to get creative with your removal since you're mono green. Yeah, mono green, in my opinion, if you're playing mono green, you kind of come to the realization, well, I'm just going to be bigger than everybody anyways, so my specific creature spot removal doesn't have to be as good. And I do have specific like creature spot removal in mind, so I have Kenrith's Transformation. I have Lignify, I have Song of the Dryads. So those specifically target creatures, but again, it's like sorcery speed, it's really slow. It still leaves them with a permanent, so it doesn't like take it away permanently, pun intended.
Yeah.
So
I
it's
ran
a little
those too. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so they're a little awkward, but I think that they're really good, especially since you could target commanders with them, and you kind of nullify the commander since they lose all other abilities. So it is kind of nice to hit a commander with those, but sometimes you don't want to leave them with a creature, so it's a little bit problematic in those cases. I mentioned I'm playing Voracious Hydra, so that's like the fight kind of mechanic. I also have Polukranos in my deck because that's a good one. You can just have it be sort of.
I'm glad you brought that
of.
up. I'm curious of your take on Polukranos. I always see, and this is just me, right? And I'm probably way off basis with this, and people are going to be like, Neal, you're full of it. But I feel like every time I play Polukranos, right? I originally had it in my deck. I feel like I never want to spend. I don't like that what is it? Monstrous? What is it? Monstrosity? Whatever keyword it is. I hate that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I feel like I never want to like pay all that mana into that, right? After you've played this creature, right? I don't know. Do you have good, do you find that it works pretty well for you? For some reason, it's never sat right with me for some reason.
It has worked well for me in the past. I've had good experiences with it, but only because I'm playing it when I can generate like 20 to 30 mana, because then it's worth it for me to do it. But yeah, I mean, not that generating a lot of mana is a problem for us. We are playing mono green, right? Especially if you can afford Gaia's Cradle like Freddie and me. But yeah, for most people, this is just a very expensive board wipe. So,
right.
Green doesn't have a lot of options for board wipes though. So, I mean, but again, the floor for Polukranos is a 4 mana 5/5. So that's really not that bad, honestly. Like 4 mana for a 5/5, it's not too bad as the floor. And then if you get to Monstrous Hit, I mean, it's kind of like Niv's Disc where you're kind of, advertising what you're about to do, right? You're playing this guy. Everyone knows you're gonna Monstrous Hits. They're like, all right, well, we got to get rid of this. So that's one of the problems with it. But at
Do
the end
you
of the day,
find people go to try to remove that the minute you play it?
No, just because sometimes they try and politic me out of targeting their stuff. That's kind of what I find in my experience.
What's your take, Freddie? What do you think?
Well, I went with my deck. I went a little bit more heavy on the Planeswalkers, and also used the Planeswalkers for removal. I know some of y'all are going to be like, "Oh, that's not mana efficient," and I totally agree. But when you have Planeswalkers coming in with, instead of 4 loyalty, you got 8, and then you -3 of Vivian, and target creature you control deals damage equal to its power to target creature or Planeswalker. And I'm still left with a 4 loyalty, sorry, a 5 loyalty Planeswalker. Yeah, sure, I want to alt all my Planeswalkers when they come in, but if need be, if I need some spot removal on the spot, I have it built into a couple of them. Ugin is in the deck for me. I love the -X ability with -14. Let's just destroy everything on the board. Period. I don't care what it is. It's gone.
Well, it's exiled, which is sometimes can be
exiled.
A bad
sorry,
thing.
even it could be a bad thing, yes, but it all depends. I mean,
it's true.
I wanted to try and play around with another take on removal, since again we are in green and it's a little bit difficult, like we had all just discussed, and I wanted to give it a shot with Planeswalkers, and there's plenty of them. And
No, that's totally fair. I didn't really focus my deck on Planeswalker specifically. I'm just playing 5. Just because, if I don't have Vorinclex, a Planeswalker, it becomes a lot weaker, especially in Commander without Vorinclex.
Sure.
But don't get me wrong, Ugin's not in my deck only because of budgetary concerns, right? So definitely play Ugin in this deck if you can, because it is a really awesome board wipe. And the ultimate is also great to get it to go off. You play Vorinclex and then play Ugin the next turn, if you ramped or whatever. I mean, that's
start
an awesome
comboing off, man. You can
yeah,
start
that's an
comboing
awesome
off
feeling.
with that.
Right, because you can just put more Planeswalkers into play with Ugin's ability and just keep ulting Planeswalkers. I mean, it's so awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, I'm running 13 Planeswalkers, so I'm definitely really heavy into the Planeswalker theme in my deck.
You know what your deck needs then? Fogs. Do you have fog effects in your deck?
Unfortunately, I don't think I put any in. So no.
Really? You don't even have constant mists?
Nope, I do not.
Oh, that's a nice one, especially for a heavy Planeswalker build.
It's a very, very nice one. Absolutely. I probably should have, and this deck is not optimized to perfection. But it's definitely a great option to put in this deck, and thanks for bringing it up. I should have put one in, but
yeah. To be fair, I'm not playing anything like that in my build either. Only because, like I said, Planeswalkers are not like the primary focus of my deck. But if you are focusing more on Planeswalkers with this guy, which I'm sure a lot of people want to, just because it's really fun to have like the Super Friends deck or whatever, and Vorinclex could be an awesome Super Friends commander. Green is also the color of fog, so there's plenty of options for fog effects. I mean,
there are
Constant Mist is just the start.
And there's plenty more to go around. Absolutely. No, I couldn't agree more. But let's talk real fast now on the card draw, which I'm going to say right now there's plenty of in green. I mean, you really, if there's one color that doesn't need any more card draw, I think it's green and blue. I don't know which one do y'all think, honestly? Let's take a poll right now. Which one do y'all think is the color that has the most support for card draw?
I'm gonna say I think the easier card draw is definitely going to be blue. Green really kind of makes you jump through hoops, right? It's really wanting you to either play creatures or have creatures that are quite big on a lot of power, right? So blue's definitely where you can do it. Instant speed outside of your turn and doesn't really need anything else on the board, right? You just need to cast that card, basically.
You know what I love about green's card draw is how impactful it is when you're casting creatures and drawing cards and casting creatures and drawing cards on your turn and just building a board state. It just kind of like, what's the word? Very synergistic. And for that, in my build, I put Guardian Project. This is one that is definitely an all-star in the build. that for CMC, whenever a non-token creature enters the battlefield under your control, if it doesn't have the same name as another creature you control, we're playing Commander, I think we should be okay. Or a creature card in your graveyard, draw a card. That with Beast Whisperer as another one that's in the deck. Garruk's Uprising. Another wonderful add for this build, especially because we're definitely casting a lot larger creatures than 4 power. Everything has trample too, which is huge. What about y'all? What did you have, Neal? Any other ones that you want to point out?
So obviously I had, Return of the Wild Speaker, which probably most people run that card, right? I had Inspiring Call, which is 2 and a green, instant draw card for each creature you control, the +1/+1 counter. Since we're kind of doing the +1/+1 counter thing, that kind of fits really nice. And then one of my favorite new cards is Toski. I really like Toski. It's difficult to destroy, and it's kind of like the mono green Edric for this deck. So it kind of just, since we're going to be playing a lot of creatures, and our creatures are probably most likely going to have trample, and people aren't going to want to block, or if they do, it's going to be difficult not to be taking any damage, right? So I really had fun with Toski in the deck as well, just because whenever you deal damage to a player, whenever a creature deals damage to a player, you get to draw a card. So, if you have 5-6 creatures.
Little nuts for the squirrel?
Absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I definitely like him. He's good. I found him really, really, really good. And then I ran Orin Frostfang, but I mean, that card's getting pricey, right? I do like the ability for having...
Rightfully so.
The Death Touch for attacking creatures, but whenever a creature, again, you control deals combat damage to a player, you get to draw cards. So it's kind of the same thing as Toski, but just 1 mana more, right? Orin's 5, Toski's 4.
So I want to point something out real quick on the Orin Frostfangs, which I had happen in one of my play tests, which is, this is the kind of synergy that I'm talking about. This is how I ended up with a 187. I had a Yorvo that was a 30 power, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had an Orin Frostfang out, and I had Toski out. It was amazing being able to draw a card because Toski's out with the trample that I had from the Garruk's Uprising that was also on the board. Having someone having to block that 30 coming across, stay alive. Having it grow exponentially because of Vigor. It was beautiful. That's the kind of synergies that make this deck super exciting for me personally. Is the interaction right there.
It's also because you're playing green, so.
Yeah, I mean, green is the color of nature, which nature is naturally beautiful. So of course it's going to be doing beautiful.
Mesmerizing.
What kind of cards did you have, Jared?
Yeah, so for drawing, I also include tutors and recursion as part of my draw package. So we can't forget about, our regrowths and eternal witnesses, right? Because we have a graveyard just like everybody else. Might as well try and use it. People think mono green, they're not going to do anything with their graveyard. Well, not necessarily true. Also, we've got the MDFC land now, which is an all-star, the Balaged Recovery, Balaged Sanctuary. So this in any mono green or any green 2-color deck, this is an auto include, in my opinion, from now until the end of time. This land is so strong. I can't even tell you how strong it is.
So let me ask you this. On Balaged Recovery, if you only had one spot, would you run this or Eternal Witness?
I would run Balaged Recovery over Eternal Witness every time.
Okay.
Because having the option, because you don't need Eternal Witness all the time. Right. Especially if you get Eternal Witness in the early game, it is not good. Mm-hmm. Especially in mono green, it is not good early game. Balaged Recovery is great at any stage of the game. If you're hurting for a land, it is a land. It will get you there in terms of mana. You draw it late game, guess what? It's not a land. It's the best card in your graveyard. So, I think it's got Eternal Witness beat for sure.
I would actually say, like you were saying, this is an auto include in a green build no matter what. And you should for sure run both in a deck. Now, when we go look at my deck, when you go look at it later, don't kill me because I don't have it in it. But
well,
I highly agree that you should have it.
Yeah, I feel like
we were considering.
Go ahead. I was just gonna say, to your point, not running Eternal Witness. Like, I feel like Eternal Witness nowadays, now that Balagad Recovery is out, is an easy cut for me, right? Because if I'm not running something like that has black in it, that I can recur creatures a little bit easier, I'd rather have, like you said, this Balagad Recovery for sure.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Unless you have ways to abuse the ETB for Eternal Witness, it's gotten a lot weaker over time. Yep.
Sure, it has, but I don't see a game where you wouldn't, or a deck where you wouldn't want to run both of them and not cut EWIT. Just have straight up two.
Well, I'm also
MDFC again. You're looking at the ability of keeping that in a mana slot. Yes, it comes in tapped, but we can get over that. Honestly, like.
You know what
Depending
else?
If it's early game, like Jared said, I wouldn't mind having a turn 1 Balagad Sanctuary come into play tapped. I'm totally fine with that.
Another odd thing that I do is, so like Eternal Witness is one that, especially if I'm playing monocolored decks, I'll cut, right? But it's the same thing that I put like with Sol Ring, right? I don't run Sol Ring in this version of the deck, right? That's an easy cut, right? Because there are certain cards that people have gotten used to having to put into their deck, right? Like even I catch myself sometimes doing it, like, oh man, I guess I should put Sol Ring in here or Arcane Signet, right? Those are those certain must-have cards, but like I purposely enjoy running green sometimes because I don't have to have those Eternal Witnesses or those Sol Rings or those must-have cards, kind of like that. So those are, or even like a lot of decks that I run, people will naturally want to put either Lightning Greaves or Swiftfoot Boots in, especially if their deck is centered around their commander. Those are easy cuts for me. I usually don't run them. It's rare. It was interesting that I did run it in this one. I actually, looking at my deck list now, I could definitely cut it because there's probably a much better card that I could put in there. Those are just kind of little weird, quirky things that I do whenever I'm building my stuff.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, I can respect that. I didn't cut Sol Ring from mine. I'll always include Sol Ring in basically any commander deck. But it's fun to take it out and see what you'd put in, It's always interesting to theorize, well, what if the rules committee banned it one day? I'm sure they're going to revise the ban list at some point, especially with the way the reserve list is going. We've talked about Guy's Cradle multiple times already. So I'm of the opinion that honestly I do expect it to get banned one day, if not for price, just for sheer power. But, that's another conversation.
Are there any other cards y'all ran for card draw?
I mean, we could talk about the auto includes that I think everybody should consider. Is Return to the Wild Speaker being one, Rishkar's Expertise. Those are great. I love me the Great Henge. I will keep standing behind that card. It's absolutely amazing. Draw a card every time a creature comes into play. Yes, please. Sign me up. And yeah, I think that's really what I have in my package was right there.
I ran Greater Good.
Greater Good, yes, with you, yes, especially y'all with the Hydras.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I found that one to be very, very good, right? Somebody tries to exile something. Well, hold on. No, we'll sacrifice in response. That way, get a little bit of value.
I'm just gonna say it now. When are they gonna put a Thassa's Oracle in green? Because we're about there. We're gonna need it in this deck. Just saying.
Yeah, no kidding.
One of the cards that I like is called Shared Summons. So that's 3 and 2 green instant. Search your library for 2 creature cards with different names and put them into your hand. I really like that card. I think it's fun just because it's an instant. You can surprise opponents with it.
Natural Order.
Yes. So
CMC, sack a creature, get a creature.
Yep. So originally, I was actually flipping through my binder, and that's when I saw shared summons. I was like, you know what? For one, I forgot that it was an instant, right? And you get to get 2 creature cards. That's pretty great. Now that you mention it, Jared, I'm adding it to mine because I was like, well, I don't want to add, natural order because it's more expensive.
Well,
I have
don't think
started
natural order would work so well in yours.
$2. It's only $2.
for shared summons, yeah.
Well, natural order also says, as an additional cost to cast natural order, sacrifice a green creature, search your library for a green creature, and put that card onto the battlefield. So for you in this deck, would definitely.
I mean, I do run other creatures than Hydras, but yeah, I mean, because there are times, because like you mentioned, when you ran your Planeswalkers, the first thing you want to do is get that emblem, right? Because nobody can interact with emblems, and most of the Planeswalkers that I ran are the ones that allow you to go reach out and grab some creatures, right? So yeah, you have to be careful and balance how much of that X spell you want to have, because cards like that we talked about earlier, such as Unbound Flourishing, you're not going to get anything out because it's going to enter as a 0 because you didn't cast it, right? So it's, you're exactly right. But yeah, I think Shared Summons is probably a much better and cheaper version especially for our decks, Jared. That's a good pick.
I really like a card that you actually put into the deck, Neal. This is totally going on a little bit of a tangent, but for protection, besides your heroic interventions of the world, I did love the fact that you put Wrap in Vigor, because we have a Vigor theme going on with Vorinclex, and why not? Let's keep the train going.
Yeah, we got the Vigor, the Force of Vigor, and got the Wrap and Vigor too. I got that in my build.
Wrap and Vigor. Regenerate each creature you control for 1 and a green. Board wipe? Yeah, I don't think so. Let's go ahead and just have them instead.
I think that's a good segue into the next part. I'd be curious to see where you or how many type of protection spells, right? Because as I was building the deck, I was thinking, well, green's actually got a pretty decent amount of cards that kind of provide protection, whether it's like Wrap and Vigor where you can regenerate each creature, or you have them a hollow, or there's like Withstand Death, which is a green and instant, it gives like indestructible. So I at one point I was kind of thinking, well, maybe I should run some cards like that. Most of them are usually instants. They usually cost between 1 to 2 mana. I'd be curious to see if y'all ran besides Wrap and Vigor, if y'all ran a few more protection spells.
I'm going to be honest and say absolutely not. Why? Because my deck is a glass cannon. It doesn't care.
Well, you have a lot of Planeswalkers. What about you, Jared?
For me, I typically don't run that much protection in my decks because really you just need it at that one point in the game, right, where you're going to win, and the only way you lose is if somebody wipes your board or whatever. So you just need that one card that stops it. So in my build, I have Heroic Intervention, which is like, pretty much the green staple protection spell. Lightning Greaves, just for Vorinclex to protect him, and then Wrap and Vigor. So those are the only pieces of protection that I include. Because again, I focused more on a little bit of the recursion, so I had like the regrowth, Eternal Witness, ways to get stuff back from the grave. And yeah, I didn't focus so much so on protection. Like I didn't have any fogs, as I mentioned earlier in my deck, so that's another way that you can protect yourself with green.
Yeah, I always end up battling with myself in this area, especially when I'm building my decks, because I tend to want to think of every possible scenario that I could run into, right? And then what I catch myself doing is I'll be play testing my deck, and I'm like, oh, well, I got blown out because somebody did this. Well, let me see if I can change a card, right? So I end up constantly going back and forth with myself. Well, maybe I should run this, and I think that can be a trap, especially for me, because I am awful at that, right? Because I'm just constantly thinking, well, I feel like I have no protection from exile. Let me go see if I can find a way to kind of protect myself from that, right? And you can really lose your synergy in your deck because you're taking out pieces. And I guess I have to come to terms that you're not going to have an answer for every single thing that's going on in the game, right? And that's always been really challenging for myself because I just feel like I have to have an answer for all things, right? So that's always something I struggle with.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely. I want to take it back for 1 second, back to removal. And there's one card that I completely forgot to mention, and I'm really sorry. I'm going to mention it now. For me, one of the MVPs goes to, especially for this build with 1/1 counters, is going to be Inscription of Abundance.
That's that new green.
Y'all familiar with that card?
That's
yep.
that brand
It's
new
from
one.
Zendikar Rising. It's 1 and a green, and it's got a kicker for 2 and a green. And it says, choose one. If the spell was hit, choose any number. So the first one is put 2 1/1 counters on target creature. Okay, with Vorinclex out or doublers out, it's going to be a lot more than that. Target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures you control. Okay, this is also pretty good if you need to get some of that life gain to get you back top on the table, especially if you've been hated down quite a bit. Life gain is always nice. Not really necessary, but it's a nice little perk, especially if you get to choose all 3. But the last one is target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. Yes, it's 5 CMC, but man, do you get a lot of value out of this card.
That's a good one.
Definitely one that I really enjoyed playing with, and I highly recommend it.
Yeah, it seems like a fun one. I considered it, but ultimately it didn't make it into my build. But I'd be willing to see how good it is.
That's why we all have 3 different builds, right? That's what makes this so much fun. Anything else that we would like to touch base on?
I think we all kind of went the same strategy, more or less. Again, I think Vorinclex is kind of linear, right? Whether you went Planeswalkers or +1/+1 counters, you're really trying to dive into that. And, again, I think there's green, obviously, can do it all, for sure. I think this was, in my version, it definitely played pretty well. It sounded like your version also played well, Freddie. I'd be interested to see what
I've had a blast.
I guess we'll have to try Jared's out.
Yeah, I haven't played mine yet, but I'm very excited to give it a try. Yep.
Alrighty. Well, that concludes it for this episode, everybody. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's always a pleasure to have all y'all come and support our channel. You will find all 3 of the deck lists down in the description below. And also, while you're down there, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe. We really appreciate all of you. Thank you very much. Everybody have a good night. Bye-bye.
See ya.
Thank you.